for people who don't maybe know what combat design is, like, of course you see in movies when people are staging these like really elaborate fight scenes and stuff, but like how does that actually work in games? Can you break that down for us a little bit?
Yeah, how to break that down.
Just in like the next minute or so, if you wouldn't mind just...
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think maybe it helps to just talk about how I got in, which is I was playing fighting games all the time at the arcade while I was in college, and I was playing side by side with game designers and really just breaking apart the game, taking it down by frame data, taking it apart by how do these moves work, really trying to understand how the game works so that I could exploit it for the most competitive advantage. So it was like completely like the selfish competitive motivation, but we had entire online communities dedicated to understanding all the data that goes into these games. So then when I got into the game industry and I was trying to like QA the controls for, say, Lara Croft or something like that, I'd say, like, this isn't really as responsive as I want it to be, and why isn't it really like that? And we'd start talking with the animators and the programmers and realize there's nobody sort of representing the player in that development space. And so I just sort of put myself forward as, let me represent the player, and I will take everything I understand about communicating with the programmer and everything I understand about communicating with the animator, and let's make a tool set so that we can combine these two disciplines into one, which is essentially gameplay design. We didn't call it that at the time. We called it systems design or even combat design. It was really about looking at everything from the input to how that works with animation to sort of what states are driven when damage is applied to an enemy, how the hit react needs to be played, which hit react is played based on what state, and then it just explodes into a bunch of systems and spreadsheets and tools, and really just somebody needed to manage all that data and all that communication, and that became me.
Can you talk a little bit about how you guys work in tandem? What does that look like?
Yeah, so had the privilege of meeting Eric on the motion capture stage. I was called on to sort of just oversee some combat moves that we were going to be doing, just to sort of just say hi, and instantly recognized Eric. And he, first off, like, he just shows up with a huge work ethic. He's ready to go. The thing that, what really shows me that Eric knows how to work with motion capture and combat design is we were doing a move like, we were performing hurdles. So you have like kind of a low wall. We were recording Eric doing these jump over attacks to sort of hit any NPC, all sorts of various attacks. And I realized that we were looking at it all from the side and watching the final footage from the side. And I realized, oh, you know what? The game camera is actually behind the player. So can we get the camera that we're capturing here to move behind Eric so that we can all witness sort of a preview and review it together on the big screen with this behind the camera. And I saw the gears turning in Eric's head, and he completely changed the way he was performing the move because he understood where the camera was, because in one sense he was performing for a perpendicular camera, and then he just completely changed the move to a behind the camera, and he did this over the side hurdle with his foot, and it, like, what he hit was this really beautiful pose that kind of nailed the sort of sideways mid-air, like legs out, and it was super dynamic and completely different than the move he had been doing before. And I said, this guy understands the camera, he understands action. I didn't have to tell him that. I didn't have to say anything. It was just almost like a, let's move the camera. Eric understood that we needed to change the move, and he adjusted. And that ability to sort of speak without speaking really goes a long way. And sort of that's one of the main just tools, I think, in any combat design workhouse. It's not pipeline of I do a thing, then hand it over to somebody else and they do their thing. It's like we really need to understand how it works together and understand the finished product together. And that's the hardest bit about combat design and hardest bit about gameplay design. And I think maybe it's Eric's history in doing Hong Kong action style filmmaking himself that he gets that as well. So me working with the team behind computers is completely different than Eric working with the team in front of a video camera, and yet we've come up with a lot of the same language. So when we meet on stage, it doesn't take long for us to get a really executed product together.
Something like Mortal Kombat versus God of War, for example, you know, the camera sees the entire character in Mortal Kombat, and it's a profile angle, so your foot placement has to be pretty spot on. With God of War, the camera it's kind of a medium wide. You don't really see the feet, so sometimes it can be a little bit more forgiving on the performer, where the foot placement may not have to be exact, but in Mortal Kombat it has to be exact. Otherwise, they have to fix it for hours, and that costs them a bunch of money. So the more that you're able, as a performer, to give them the exact foot placement that they need and the exact silhouette that they need, then they don't really care about the speed so much. If you hit the silhouette, and if your body, and, you know, if you have a nice anticipation that leads into it, and it's kind of the same with God of War. It's the same with all these games, where you figure out what they need. You get their shopping list, right? We need a long anticipation before the attack. We need a really cool silhouette, and we need a recovery time of 30 frames, whatever it might be. And you have to stick your feet when you're in that recovery pose, right? Because it's a big move. And as long as you're kind of hitting that shopping list, then however you get those things, you sort of like program that skeleton in your mind, and then you copy that. And that's the process that I go through every time with this. And it's for every move is going to be different. One of the things that I appreciate about a guy like Joe is that he will explain this stuff to the performer. And, you know, a lot of us who come from that world, like you said, of making these indie martial art movies, where we really understood action from the perspective of the camera and even the editing, because if the camera doesn't see it, it didn't happen. And that's really how action works. And so often in movies, the action team is compartmentalized, you know, it's over here, and then the camera team is over here, and never the two shall meet, only through the director. And that could be a very difficult communication barrier. And so for a lot of us in the independent world, the camera and the action team were one and the same. A lot of stunt guys would pick up the camera and shoot, and then they say, okay, it's my turn to fight. They hand the camera off. Literally, we would hand the camera off to the other stunt guy, and he would shoot our scene. That's just how we learned how to do it. And with that kind of came an understanding of there are certain ways that you move depending on the camera angle. For shooting from a profile, these kicks look a certain way. And this is a big learning lesson for Tekken, and the Tekken in real life thing, which was that, you know, Tekken is shot profile, so I shot everything profile from the side, like what Joe was saying. And that's how we shot, you know, when we were motion capturing Mortal Kombat, I kind of understand if the camera is profile, then I know that certain things look good from that angle, right? And with in-game, it's a little bit easier because the camera is always there. When it comes to doing cinematics, if the team has not figured out what the camera angle is, then we don't know where to play to.
Yeah.
And this is a design. This is a pipeline thing that we're talking about, where sometimes the camera is not figured out until after the motion capture is shot. And a lot of teams, bless them, they just make games that way. And that puts the onus on the animation and the cinematic team to make the action look cinematic. However, and I think Joe and I agree on this, and this is why we click, which is that the camera and the action have to be talking from the beginning. They can't be they can't talk later on, because your action is going to look a certain way, and the camera is only going to be able to. It's going to see a bad angle on the kick, and maybe people who are not used to making action scenes and action games, they won't know that, and you're just kind of losing points when you pick bad angles like that.
When I look at you guys, the way you talk about your projects, the way you talk about your work, it feels a bit like watching a basketball team, a well-oiled machine. You know that, you know, you don't even have to talk because you already know what the other person is thinking, and but. Especially if you do not have to, how often, for example, do you have to adjust what you came up with before a session like that? How hard is it to actually prepare a session like that? Especially when you, of course, want to be efficient as possible and not lose any money.
I mean, always sort of plan for losing money, so lose it as cheaply as possible, basically. That's the fail fast, fail better. The word iteration, basically, if you take it seriously, it means you will mess up on the first try. So I'm an expert. I give myself always 3 tries to hit it. So if I do that in a efficient way, I will bring the team on as early as possible, and we will try something in very roughly and review it together, and then keep going, make our iterations as quick as possible. But I try to nail everything in 3 to 5 tries, but I've seen teams take as many as 17 tries to get the melee swings right. And yeah, I think we fall into habits. every combat game out there, you want to start your basic 3-hit combo of like 1, 2, 3, right? It's sort of like the short, heavy sort of mentality. It works for a reason, for a lot of reasons. So we sort of base a lot of things on that, but then we fall into these habits of everything has the same screen shake, everything sort of hits the same, the hit reacts all like the same. So how do we break out of that? Like that's why we start with character design. We start with sort of like analogs. Like the Ubisoft method is definitely take an animal. And is this character Altair? Is he an eagle? Is Lara Croft a panther? Like, what is sort of the animal that they embrace? Combat is so much about timing and emotion. So music really speaks to me. I'm like, is this person playing Michael Jackson's Beat It in their head? Or is this a Tool song like 46 and 2? And sort of like, what song is rolling through this person's head when they're holding this weapon? Or like, what is the rogue's weapon versus what is the knight's weapon? And what is it, metal, or is it symphony, or is it something else? And sort of like the flow of music really can inform combat. It is timing, it is feeling. So I take whatever I can to sort of break myself out of a pattern, and part of that is just exploring it with other people that have other interests, and getting that out as early as possible. But I think what we talked about earlier is it's really about knowing who the character is and knowing what we want, even if we're wrong, just setting a direction and trying for it. And you can adjust your direction or you can adjust your orientation, but you need to know where you're going with it.